Hello, welcome to another drawing session. Today we're going to talk about the difference between copying and tracing. There's different thoughts about how copying something can be useful or benefit your drawing practice, and I'd say the big difference is that if you copy it by tracing, there's not as much learning going on. But if you have already like a flat two-dimensional drawing, and this one is from one of my favorite books as a child, Douglas Hall's Nursery Rhymes. These images are already rendered on a surface, so instead of looking at something in 3 dimensions, you have each line pre-drawn for basically getting your eye in about shapes, breaking down textures, and how to render color and do things like that. Now, the subject matter that you choose is entirely up to you. When I was a child, I loved Batman from the 1990s, Superman from the 1980s, and I remember getting books as a kid that were basically full of graphic images of those superheroes. And I used to spend hours looking at the books, copying over what I could see to a page. And so my drawings weren't perfect tracings, they weren't perfect imitations. They were inventive. I created different parts and added elements to what I was seeing on the page. But essentially, the tip here is to look at an image, and it can be as simple as these kinds of images here. I've got a book of pictorial symbols, which are basically in public signage, different functions and purposes of these signs. So I might, for example, just choose a very simple one here, a movie camera. So I can look at that movie camera image, it's black and white, I can take a permanent marker, any size. I'm just going to get my eye in with drawing that circular pattern. And I can start with pen straight up if I feel bold and good about that. This could be just like a felt tip pen from a color pack or anything really of that nature. But the idea is that we can take a simple image or symbol, and just by looking at those basic shapes and breaking it down into what they call the proportions, so it's the size of each part relative to the other parts. And this is very basic, very simple. Getting that black, and then I have a smaller shape there, another shape there, and a larger one here. That's the lens. I'm just doing this very quickly. That's the viewfinder. And then you have a little tripod mount, and then the 3 legs of a tripod. So I'm looking at that image, I'm just going back and forth with my eye. Something that simple can be a really good training exercise, and you can go as complex as you like. So this is just one example of a book full of symbols. You can go online, you can go on the internet, find images like this, use your phone as a translation device. Children's books, beautiful animated books, art books. If you're into a specific artist, I encourage you to look at their drawing work. I'm a big fan of these two. So 18th century illustrations are excellent. The prints of this work are so fine. If I can bring that up there, there's a lot of very fine plate work, hatching work going on, cross-hatching work, stippling, which is basically creating dots on the surface to produce depth and volume. There's some beautiful examples online of royalty-free Victorian era or 18th century era drawings and etchings. And they're just providing you with so much detail to wrap your head around, just to really look at those already flat images. Another artist I like is Brian Froud, he has some beautiful books which incorporate both his sketching and kind of study style with some full works, some beautiful full works of different mythical and magical creations. And so there's gorgeous combinations of these simple line drawings, pencil drawings with more complex works as well. That's only a fraction of recommendations, but look at what you like to draw. It could be a cartoon, it could even be manga or anime. The idea is that we're not tracing over the top, we're not going from overlaying tracing paper and getting it exactly right, but at looking at how each element fits together, how things are rendered, how things are produced to create depth and volume, and inspiring yourself with artists that you admire and appreciate. So finally, just to add to that, we might just do one more example of a slightly more complex drawing than a symbol. Here is some crabs, which I'm just going to look at the smallest one here right in the middle, because there's enough detail even in that one for me to really learn some things about how that artist has produced that crab. So you can start straight up with a fine liner, or you can use a HB pencil. This is where HB pencils come in very handy, because the hardness means that pen can generally go over the top of them, and they're light enough that you can erase anything you don't like about it later on, just to leave the pen work remaining. So I'm going to look at this crab very carefully and just start on a very loose sketch of the shape of his body and then his legs. And I'm not going to do a lot of detail with the pencil, because it's a sort of a waste of time if we're going straight into pen later anyway. So I'm looking at those little shapes of his legs and his claws there. Same with that one. Just getting a general sense of where they go. That's a bit wider, that shape there. His third leg down there, and then another one. Another one there. You look at each part, breaking down an object into simpler shapes, so everything can be simplified, and that way it's less intimidating, it's less daunting to approach something that's more complex than a symbol or a simple shape, simple object. You can start to... So now I have the beginnings of his legs happening. Again, I'm not going over the top with the detail, because I can do that later. I just want to give myself a guideline for the pen work that I do next. So I'll come around this way. One more here. That's sort of behind that one. As I say, this can be anything you want. You can look at any object that's been rendered, that's been drawn, or painted, or sketched, and use that as your inspiration. So this is really entirely up to you. Okay, so now I can start to look at the hatching work that's in there. Start to go around again with my pen, around the object. I'm going to do this in a quick, kind of very sketchy style, very loose, but still using that hatching. So hatching is basically just creating a series of repeated lines. And if I'm really inspired by this 18th century work, it's quite detailed and very specific. It's very, very linear. But we can start to see the formation of depth just by our hatching work. So just line after line, this way and that way, making sure we leave some areas of lightness, and then adding the little hairs on his legs, so we can go around and round like this, adding those larger segments of his legs there. Doing a bit more hatching in there. Eventually you start to see it becoming more like the image we're inspired by. Just with the use of our pen, paying attention to where those lines are that the artist has drawn, and the shapes and sizes relative to each other, so bearing in mind proportion of each individual shape. So I'm just drawing a series of long, almost like sausage-like shapes, and they've got tiny little lines coming off them. I'm just working my way around, and that one's quite dark, so I can keep hatching in there until it's almost completely black. And there's this little weird claw bit on the end. Now in the body, we've got this eye here. We've got a separation around the mouth area. Another one here. And just some very light hatching across the top of his head. There's a element of indentation on his forehead. Got more fragments, sections of his shell, which are getting increasingly dark. So again, the closer I put my lines together, and if I overlay those lines in an opposite direction, I'm starting to see the sense of volume. So it's a bit different to using charcoal and pencil to essentially rub the volume in, to spread the charcoal out on the page. We're using the ink by hatching to create a very similar effect in that shadow work that we're doing. And it just takes practice, it just takes exploration, and knowing where we're headed to by looking back at that inspiration point, looking back at that drawing for all the information we need. It's just that it's already drawn for us, as opposed to a still life object, which can be a little bit more daunting for some people. It can be a little bit more intimidating to draw straight from life. So this is just helping me to see, there's all these little details that I just need to produce in my own way. Yeah, so I'll just keep going there for as long as I like. Can make it as unique to my style as I want to. Make it a bit more sketchy and chaotic. That's all good. Again, you can take your time. You can take a lot more time than I am here with your detail work. Don't rush it. Don't force it. Go at your own pace. Go at your own measure. And I'm going to get a bit more darkness in here. A pen. And again, the gaps between each line create whole variations of what the darkness or lightness will be. So I've basically just kept looking back at my drawing here, my original print in this book, to make something inspired by it that still has a bit of my own style in it, a bit of my own touch of chaos and looseness. So I could just keep going with this and keep playing, and there's so many things, so many images that we can choose from, things that we're inspired by, we're motivated by, and we'll always make them into our own. We never forget that as an artist we have our own unique perspective, our own viewpoint on the world. So thanks again for watching today. I'll see you next time.